Hi there and welcome to the fourth seminar in Newport Mind's Time to Think series, run by our whole school approach to mental health team here at Newport Mind. My name's Abby and I'm here today with my colleague Amy, and this session today is on the teenage brain. So firstly, I'm going to run you through what we're going to be speaking about today. We're going to start off by introducing the teenage brain and then focus on two specific areas, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. We're then going to move on to risk-taking and reward-seeking behaviours, which is going to be led by Amy, moving into decision-making, sleep, and applying this knowledge to parenting. And then it'll be back to me for some signposting information at the end. Okay, so we're starting by looking at a bit of an introduction to the teenage brain. So young people's brain size and function are at different stages of development across their childhood. Children's brains grow substantially when they're very young, and by the time they start adolescence, their brains are already about 90 to 95% of their full adult size. However, they're not yet as developed in terms of brain function. This is something we'll go into in a bit more detail shortly. The teen brain also has a high degree of plasticity, which means it can change, adapt, and respond to its environment more easily than an adult brain. But we must remember that the brain is not the only part of the teenage body that is constantly developing and changing. Ongoing physical, chemical, emotional, and social changes are all happening simultaneously throughout their bodies and among their environments. It's thought that this overwhelming change may explain why adolescence is the time when mental health problems can emerge. We know that 50% of all mental health problems are established by the age of 14. And 75% by the age of 24. In addition, 20% of adolescents may experience a mental health problem in any given year. And to give you a bit more context around this, we're going to start by focusing on two areas, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So I'm going to start by talking about the amygdala. The amygdala is the center for emotions, emotional behavior, and motivation, and is most commonly associated with impulses, aggression, and instinctive behaviour. It also plays a central role in our fear and anxiety response, with research suggesting that information about potentially frightening things in our environment can actually reach the amygdala before we're even consciously aware that there's anything to be afraid of. So quite an interesting research study there. The amygdala is also fully developed at birth, which is evident through our instinctive threat detection function that is online from birth. So for example, this is seen in babies crying when they're very young, and that instinctive crying is when they're in discomfort. That's something they're born with initially. So moving over to the prefrontal cortex, this is something that holds a very different set of priorities to the amygdala. This is the decision-making part of the brain, and it's responsible for planning, thinking about consequences, solving problems, and impulse control. The main brain change occurring in teenage years is that unused connections in the thinking and processing part of your child's brain, called the grey matter, are pruned away. And at the same time, other hopefully more helpful connections are strengthened. And this is the brain's way of becoming more efficient based on a kind of use it or lose it principle. This pruning process begins in the back of the brain, and so the prefrontal cortex, which is at the front, is remodeled last. Now, because of this, the prefrontal cortex is not actually fully developed until around 25 in females and 30 in males. So very different there to the amygdala. So what does this mean for our young people? Well, for teenagers, as displayed here using the size of the fonts, these two areas of the brain are at very different stages of development during teenage years. As your teens are navigating their adolescent lives, managing puberty and taking on more responsibility and understanding their identity, they are moving between basing decisions and actions and behaviours on their emotion centre, the amygdala, and their logic centre, the prefrontal cortex, all because of these differences in neurological development. So because the prefrontal cortex is still developing, teenagers might rely more on the amygdala to make decisions and solve problems more than adults do, meaning that their emotions are likely to be prevailing over their logic. Therefore, decisions will be based on emotions and impulses For example, choosing what feels good over what feels right, leading to an increase in the likelihood of teens showing pleasure or reward-seeking behaviours and risk-taking behaviours, which Amy is going to now take you through in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Abby. So before we go headlong into that, let's take a little look at what are some of the risks that young people might be taking during this time. We might be looking at pushing the boundaries, whether that be at home, at school, or in society. It might be experimenting with different substances, alcohol or drugs. It might be risky sexual behavior. It might just be actually pushing themselves to take on a challenge which they haven't met before, or gaining a new skill, or trying to learn a new hobby. So not all of the risks that they take are sort of have negative consequences, but the ones we more often see and that we worry about as parents and caregivers will be the ones where we think actually they could come to some harm. So what do we think adolescents see as a reward? Well, it's usually something to do with, as Abby mentioned before, they get that hit of dopamine in response to taking that risk, and that makes them feel good. Therefore, the things that make them feel good are perhaps positive reinforcement from their peers, and it might be actually eating something that tastes nice, or doing something that feels fun. That's the reward. It's that feedback that they're getting with the reward seeking loop inside themselves chemically. So what do we know from neuroscience about risk and reward in terms of adolescence? Well, we know that adolescents release more dopamine than adults in response to stimulating experiences. So as we were talking about before in that reward loop, that is more influential for adolescents because the dopamine hit is higher than an adult. So where we would see something as fun, but we actually think, no, there's too many consequences, it's not worth it. For them, the high is higher, so actually it's worth doing. We also know that adolescent peaks in reward-seeking behaviour are more pronounced in males than females. It doesn't mean that every male is necessarily then going to go to the extremes of reward-seeking behaviour, because there are individual differences in the biology across the board, males and females. So it's not, it's certainly not signing the warrant on that boys are going to be more trouble or come into more trouble themselves. But generally we see this as a slight pattern. We know that there are peaks in adolescent risk-taking behaviour cross-culturally. So in all different cultures, in all different ways that society organises itself, we see these same peaks. Therefore, neuroscientists are coming to the idea that risk-taking is actually a necessary process for adolescents to go through in order to become functioning adults. And it's really based on the idea, the old adage, I suppose, that experience is the best teacher. If we go through an experience, we often come out thinking, whoa, that was close. Okay, maybe next time I do it this way. And actually, unless they've gone through that process, they are not going to build that wealth of experience on which to base their future decisions. Obviously, as parents, we need to make sure that the risk that they are letting themselves in for is one that will allow them to get to adulthood and carry on using that. But we'll talk a little bit more about how, as parents, we might interact with that in a sec. So let's look in a little bit more detail at how adolescents make decisions. So Abby mentioned earlier that the amygdala is hugely influential in making these decisions, and we're going to look at that in a sec. First, we're going to look at how adults actually make a decision. So in adult brains, we see increased levels of myelination. Now, myelination is like the tube essentially around an electrical wire. So we all know electrical wires that we have in our house. It has the metal bit in the middle, which is the electrical signal is sent down, but that's covered in plastic, and that's to insulate that signal to make sure it gets there efficiently and effectively without going to the wrong place, and to do it quickly. So myelin is a substance that coats tracks the axons between the neurons in our brain. And that helps us to be efficient thinkers and to essentially target for the brain to be optimized essentially for decision making. When an adult makes a decision, they are using a different part of the brain than adolescents. So adults, because of the experience that they've built up, will use their visual cortex, the occipital lobe at the back of the head. So rather than having to laboriously think through, oh, this is a tricky situation, what do I do here if I do this, X, if I do this, Y, immediately they see the potential outcome because they've seen it before, they've experienced it before. And once they've seen that potential outcome, it's very easy to say, I'm not doing that, this is the safe option. So we have a much more efficient onboard decision-making computer, but that's because it's been allowed to base itself on experience. Adolescents, conversely, have greater connectivity between the emotion reward centers and the prefrontal cortex. So when they make a decision, they are trying to think through laboriously the options, and the thing that's feeding that is the prefrontal cortex, so what feels good. And that's why some of these risky behaviors and risky decisions can be more prevalent in adolescents. We also know that stress can amplify the tendency to take risk in adolescents. So if they are under more pressure for whatever reason, they are more vulnerable to make risky decisions. So we're going to have a little look at sleep, because sleep is one of the things that helps optimize brain development and helps us to have the resources we need to make effective decisions. It influences our dopamine levels, so we're not dipping down with a lack of sleep. It helps us stay healthy physically in terms of immunity to diseases. It helps keep us a stable weight. It helps our mental health, as well as our academic performance and ability to concentrate in school, and our creative ability. So if all of these things are suffering negatively because of a lack of sleep, that has a massive influence on lots of other areas of the adolescent's life, and then their ability to make decisions and sort of be proactive and move forward positively. So this is why we're kind of bringing sleep in as an important aspect. So we're going to look a little bit at sleep hygiene, how you as a parent maybe can help support your young person to get the best night's sleep that they can. These are the things that we know can help support a good night's sleep. We know that in reality, a lot of these things won't happen or don't happen and might not be necessary for every particular person. So it's about having that conversation with your young person to see if there's anything here that can help to get a better extra hour or whatever. So generally the advice is to have low levels of stimulation in the room they sleep. So that could be light, temperature, sound, electrical devices. It may be the amount of stuff that's in their room. So if there's a messy bedroom that's too light, too bright, too hot, it's very difficult to feel calm enough then to switch off. There is advice around having sleep and wakeful zones as well. So research shows that if someone is active, doing something active while sitting in their bed, so it might be going on a screen, or it might be doing a craft or something when they're sitting on the bed, that the brain then begins to associate the bed with something wakeful, with an activity. So it suggests trying to have a little bit of a boundary about what you're in your bed for. And essentially, even if there's not much room, the idea would be that if you're going to just sit on your bed, you sit at the opposite end to the pillow where your head lays, so that at least there's a slight definition between this is where I am when I'm waking and this is where I am when I'm sleeping. And the brain then will associate the pillow and that end with the sleep. The advice is to avoid any stimulants like caffeine or sugar after 3 p.m. because they stay in the blood system for a long time. There is a golden hour, it's talked about, of sleep-inducing habits before bed. So during the day, or certainly when we wake up, cortisol is released inside our brains, which is the get ready to go, let's switch on kind of hormone. At the end of the day, our brains release a different chemical, melatonin, and that helps our bodies to shut down and get ready for bed. If we are doing very stimulating things before bed, like going on our phones or watching TV, there's a type of light there which stimulates daylight, which can stop the production of melatonin at the right time. So the golden hour is typically about avoiding screens for that hour and doing something that actually calms you and makes you feel relaxed, so you're ready to fall asleep when you get into bed. Regular bedtimes are also recommended. That's between weeks and the weekends. So the body needs to get into that diurnal rhythm, that day-night rhythm. And it's harder for it to do that if the bedtimes on the weekends vary wildly to the bedtimes in the weeks. And I know that the typical thing, adolescents sleeping in till all hours when they can. It might be that you just have that conversation and pull it back by an hour or two. But that will be something you and your young person can think about together. And then the last thing on here is about having natural light exposure on waking. So one of the things that stimulates the body's diurnal rhythm, the day-night rhythm, is by exposure to sunlight as soon as you wake up, because that's one of the things that triggers the cortisol to go, okay, we're awake now, we're ready. And that just helps to set that rhythm, that pattern. Okay, so how can we apply all of these things to parenting? Well, earlier I said experience is the best teacher. I really like this quote, actually. It just sort of reflects back on that and goes, let's tweak that a little bit. Experience isn't the best teacher, evaluated experience is. So what that's really saying is that having an experience of taking a risk is part of the way that we learn, but actually we get the most out of that experience if we look back on it, reflect on it, and actually realize the things we maybe might want to do differently next time. And as a parent, we're perfectly placed to be the person who can help them have that reflective, evaluative discussion. This fits in very much in terms of the previous seminars that we've done on active listening and on parenting adolescents in particular, because it refers back and uses and sort of builds on the consultant model of parenting, which we do explore in the Parenting Adolescence seminar. Briefly, this is a model of parenting where you're not considered to be the boss, the manager, the one who calls all the shots and the decisions, but it's a model where you respect your young person and their capacity to make decisions, but you're beside them, half a step behind while they do that, talking things over, not judging them, so that they do feel able to discuss these things with you. So I've mentioned being non-judgmental. It's a key factor that I think both Abby and I realised through talking to young people in our capacity as delivering one-to-ones. A lot of young people feel they can't talk to parents if they get judged too often. It's very, very difficult to hold that back as a parent, especially when you're worried about their future. But if you want to have that dialogue, if you want them to trust you, it's one of the key things they say to us again and again. Another thing we can do as parents is to provide risk in a positive way. So I mentioned earlier about new challenges, new hobbies, and maybe providing more flexible boundaries. So if we can provide risk for our young people, where they're getting to push the boundaries, feeling like they're growing and developing and taking on those challenges, but in a way where it is safer for them to do so, then that can only be a positive thing. And it might be that you want to talk to your young person about what they would see as an exciting, rewarding challenge or hobby to add into the routine that's not maybe there already. So the good news is that adolescent brains are constantly developing. As Abby said, they're on a very long path of progression, so they're nowhere near completed when they're with us as adolescents. They are prepared to adapt to new challenges, and they are shaped by their experiences. So as a parent, we can be part of that experience that they are getting. We can be part of the reflective, evaluative discussions, and we can allow them and help create those environments for them where they experience risk in a positive way. And lastly, I just want to draw it back down to the fact that individual differences in biology and in environment do exist. So your young person will be different to the next young person and have a different experience and an environment around them to the next young person. And again, as a parent, you're perfectly placed to work with that and tailor what you know your young person might need, listen to their needs to optimize the experiences you're actually giving them. Okay, so back over to Abby now for some signposting in this area.
Thanks, Amy. So we're just going to provide you with a few details of some services and websites in case you want to get any more information or get in touch with us. So the first contact on there is for Newport Mind. So if you aren't from the Newport area, it might be worth looking at your local Mind by just searching on the Mind website. Our contact details here at Newport Mind are 01633 258 741, or there's a link there to the website. You might want to pause the screen at the moment to write down some of these details. In addition, signposting for young people. These are the top 3 sort of websites and phone numbers that we tend to signpost to. That's Childline, which offers a 24/7 phone line, text and email service for young people. And Young Minds and The Mix are also some really nice young people friendly websites with information specifically on mental health, but then also on general issues concerning young people in, across the UK. And then finally, some other ones to consider as well is getting to know your school safeguarding lead, or possibly even the head of year, or if you have a trusting relationship with another member of staff, then that's great. Speaking to the school about any concerns that you have, because they are very well placed to know what services are available in your local area as well. If you're ever unsure, you can go to your GP, who can also signpost you further to other services. And of course, in an emergency, we would recommend going to A&E or calling 999. Now, in terms of signposting for parents and caregivers, we also have services available at Newport Mind. So the same contact details are there if you would like to get in touch with us about our adult and family services. Young Minds, the mental health charity for young people, have a parents advice line available Monday to Friday, 9:30 till 4. And the phone number is there. Again, please pause the video if you'd like to look at those details. There's also Talking Zone in our local area, which is the Newport sort of Gwent area, that provide a parent consultation line. Talking Zone is a school-based counselling service for young people, but they have this parent consultation line for parents to get in touch with as well. Please check your local area or check with your school if they'll know the details of any services available around counselling and parent advice for your local area. And then at Newport Mind, again, we have private counselling services, or if you're from another area, you can go to Counselling Direct to search for a counsellor in your local area. But again, you can research those. There are plenty of websites for you to find private counsellors with as well. And of course, if you can have any concerns, go to your GP, or if there's an emergency, you can go to A&E or call 999. One thing we will say is that with all of this signposting information, it's best to have these discussions with your young people, help them to learn these numbers, to learn these websites, to access them themselves, and to learn which ones work best for them, rather than directing people to a website. It's nice to explore it together possibly and see what works best for them. And also for you as well, you'll know when you come across the right website for you with the right information. So given all of that, we'd just like to say thank you for joining us today. We've included our contact details here on the slide. So if you'd like to get in touch with any questions, we'd really appreciate hearing from you about how you found our video, about anything that you would like us to possibly cover in the future. And any feedback that you have as well would be lovely to hear from. It would be lovely to hear from you. So thank you so much for joining us today.